Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, continuing our deep dive into this Oklahoma Sooners program, heading into spring practice, fall camp, the 2024 season. And Dale, we took a look at the offensive line, the defensive line, the offensive skill positions. Now we're taking a look at the back end of this Oklahoma defense, the secondary. Also going to wrap in that linebacker group as well. Kind of talk about two things. One, what we saw from this unit in 2023, and then what is this unit going to look like in 2024? A ton of young talent coming back to the Sooners in 2024. And I think my biggest takeaway is Oklahoma really went out and only got one guy for the back end of this defense in DeJon Malone. I think that signifies to the Oklahoma fans that they feel pretty good about what they have coming back in the secondary. Excited to get into it. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys, and it has been a blast taking our deep dive into this Oklahoma program, and the amount of support you guys have shown, it has been incredible. It means a ton to the fellas. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and more importantly, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. This is the best part about doing these deep dives, especially talking Oklahoma football. Very knowledgeable conversations. We learn a ton from you guys. Appreciate y'all rocking with us, Dill. I'm going to give you the T-box, and I want to go back to what we saw from this unit in 2023. How we feeling?
Yeah, I think the big thing that you kind of mentioned is it got a lot better from 2022 to 2023. And a lot of it just kind of came down to being in better positions, communicating better, not leaving as many holes. And again, that's still something, obviously, if you watched Oklahoma a fair amount, that's still something that I think you have a lot of more room to improve. But again, I think what you're looking at is it was a pretty young group last year. I mean, aside from Pearson and Woody Washington, they were all juniors and down. And frankly, you saw a lot of guys working, a Spears Jennings, a Kendall Dolby, like new faces. And I thought they played well. I think what you're kind of looking for is guys who can maybe be a little bit better in man coverage and be able to play the ball a little more effectively than what they were.
Well, so this is the conversation that I have. And one, pointing out the positives, one, you said it best. This unit got so much better from 2022 to 2023. And I think there's a lot of reason to believe that they're going to take another step in 2024 going into year three. Dill, 2 turnovers per game forced. That was number 3 in the country. This team was getting their hands on a lot of footballs, creating a lot of havoc, especially in the back end. That's something you're really excited about. Now, to get into some of the things that you want to see Oklahoma work on, they didn't play a ton of man coverage. It was a lot of zone. They didn't mix up their coverages a lot. And when you saw them drop into zone, they were getting crushed at times in the middle of the field. I mean, linebackers getting sucked up to those RPOs, kind of leaving that middle of the field for, I guess the best way to describe it is easy pickings for quarterbacks and wide receivers to operate. I have some numbers here to kind of back it up because I saw it on the film, went back and charted out some games. Against Arizona, Noah Fafita was 18 of 20 for over 300 yards attacking the middle of the field. You go back to the Texas game. Quinn Ewers was 13 of 16 for 220 yards. And then the Oklahoma State game, 14 of 15 for 167 yards. I saw it on the film. The numbers back it up. What I think Oklahoma would benefit from dramatically, and I think they certainly can do it, is getting a little bit more comfortable with those linebackers, dropping back into those zones and making those throwing windows just a little bit tougher to attack. Because again, you go back to that first half of the Arizona game, and it was too easy for Noah Fafita working the middle of the field. If they can kind of take those steps, get some of those young linebackers a little bit more comfortable and dropping back into those zones, I think that would mean meaningful improvement for this Oklahoma team heading into 2024 here.
And I don't disagree. Of course, that was probably the biggest issue is they didn't deal with the middle of the field particularly well at any point in the year. But that part of me kind of thinks is like, well, why can't you throw in a little bit of man coverage? I just don't think you see really premier defenses stick to one system and that's all they do. Aside from maybe Iowa, who I don't know how they do it, but they just run a perfect zone. There's no windows ever, it feels like. And again, they probably don't have the horses to play much man coverage at the end of the day. Oklahoma, you look at, this is becoming a very talented secondary. They've been recruiting the position very well. And I think, again, if you can mix in a little bit more variation in what you do and rely on a guy like Kendall Dolby to be able to cover in the middle, or rely on a guy like Spears Jennings to cover in the middle a little bit more effectively, I think that takes a lot of pressure off your zone coverage, because when you kind of know what they're going to be throwing zone at you, you can run routes that beat zone coverage.
You said it best. Like that, you saw teams kind of know they were playing zone, and they would have their slot wide receivers and their tight end say, "Hey, I know where I'm going to have to sit this down to beat zone coverage." When you start mixing in that man coverage, it throws opposing offenses off a little bit. But you saw opposing offenses really run those route concepts to attack the zone coverage that the Oklahoma Sooners kind of stuck to throughout the season. And I think you make a really good point. Like, I don't know if Lincoln Riley left this team from a defensive back standpoint with enough horses that you feel could hold up in man coverage. I think Brent Venables has done a phenomenal job getting this secondary right. Guys like Peyton Bowen at the safety position to do a better job holding up. So I wonder if now that you feel a little bit more confident with your personnel, we have more confidence in, hey, go match up in man coverage. Don't allow for separation, where maybe 2 years ago you really didn't have that confidence. Now, getting into the more exciting conversation, and that is 2024. I want to start with the linebacker group. Dill, you have the shirt on. Oklahoma is returning. The Danny Stutzman shirt, absolutely love it. Let's make no mistake about it. Oklahoma is returning one of, if not the best linebacker in college football in 2024. And Danny Stutzman, numbers were phenomenal. 104 tackles, 37 run stops, 16 tackles for loss. Dill missed only 9% of his tackles. Those numbers were incredible. Now, we know Danny Stutzman is going to be a dude for this Oklahoma team in 2024. My conversation is, what does that other linebacker position look like? And I'll say this, we saw a lot of Jaren Kanak, but we saw a lot of Kip Lewis to end that season. I think you're looking at a very intriguing position battle for that other linebacker spot, because a guy like Kip Lewis, young, still kind of learning that game, kind of getting those instincts. I think Kip Lewis might be the starting linebacker heading into 2024.
I mean, that's like going to be the conversation. And frankly, I think both of them can play. I think obviously Kanak has his lack of ability in the cover area at the end of the day. I mean, not the smoothest mover at that linebacker spot, certainly not the greatest dropper into those zone coverages, as we kind of mentioned. But again, I think like he does play in the box really effectively, very good against the run for the most part, especially if he cleans up some of the missed tackles. But I'm kind of with you. I think for like all down, all purpose kind of games, and maybe you like mix in Kanak on some of those rundowns or some of those teams like in Arkansas that want to bully you around. But I think Kip Lewis probably going to take a fair amount of those reps, just because, I mean, the upside's way better. And frankly, I think he really holds his own physically. I mean, he is a little undersized, but he's a tough linebacker. He makes a lot of tackles. And I think you started to see his instincts kind of come out, where he was getting to the line of scrimmage quick enough to beat blocks, not necessarily just beating them physically, but getting there quickly, getting into gaps and making a lot of plays.
Yeah, I look at Kip Lewis and see a guy that is ascending in the right direction. And this is not a shot at Jaren Kanak, who would be a starting linebacker for a lot of programs across the country, but it was a rocky road for Jaren Kanak. Like, he had some games where he was not fitting the run well. He was missing a lot of tackles, missed 22.2% of his tackles last year. I think Kip Lewis, trending in the right direction, gives you probably a little bit more athleticism at that linebacker spot as well. Going to be an interesting position battle, but quite frankly, two guys that are going to play a lot, I think balance each other out quite well as well. And then you get back to the secondary room, and I think it starts with returning, I think, for my money, the best safety duo in the country here with Billy Bowman Jr., who had 6 interceptions. You talk about game-changing safety in the back end. That's Billy Bowman. And then you talk about a guy in Peyton Bowen, who I thought, quite frankly, should have been playing more as a true freshman. You get another year under your belt. I would challenge the listeners to name me a better safety duo heading into 2024 than those two cats right there.
And the big thing about getting Bowen back is he is that one guy who really felt like he was always kind of on point in terms of where he was supposed to be, playing with good instincts and then tackling. I mean, that's probably the big thing that this unit just got way better at. They didn't miss a ton of tackles. Peyton Bowen, or I should say Billy Bowman.
Getting mixed up. Billy Bowman, yeah.
Billy Bowman really doesn't miss a ton of tackles. I thought, like, again, just what the dynamic ability he brings, and in that ability to kind of play that cover one free safety role. That's why I almost think, like, man, maybe they could go to a little bit more man coverage, because you do have some rangy safeties who can play that center field or deep half kind of role really effectively. And when you have that, you can, I think, be pretty dangerous in those man cover schemes in mixing in with your zones.
Yeah, I agree. When you have two safeties that you know that it can do so many different things, and what both of them do exceptionally well is run the alley and tackle. And they fire downhill, they make their tackles. When you have two safeties that are as dangerous as those two, it gets a lot easier to call defense. What I'm looking for is going into year 3, you get a new defensive coordinator, you get a new mind in there. You're probably looking to utilize those safeties as game changers a little bit more than you did in 2023. Then
And I will say, I don't want to like pretend that Robert Spears Jennings doesn't exist in that safety room, because he's almost like a guy, like, how do you really keep him off the field? I thought in that Oklahoma State game, especially, that's really good football he played in that game. I mean, you gotta, I feel like, find a way to have him on the field. Another guy who tackles really well from that safety spot, I think can work in the box pretty effectively. So a guy who I think should make his way on the field as well.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to next. You kind of read my mind there. Shout out. You got so much versatility at this cornerback room. Like, you can play a guy like Robert Spears Jennings as that cheetah role. And that's kind of where I want to go to next. Is what I love most about this defensive back room, so to speak, is the versatility of what these guys can do. And you have a couple of guys that I want to talk about, one being Robert Spears Jennings, another guy being potentially Kendall Dobie, and another guy in Deshaun McCullough. And I want to highlight Deshaun McCullough real quick. He's a guy that I think I'm really excited for year 2 in this scheme, because he's a guy that at Indiana was primarily like an outside linebacker that was rushing on the edge a lot, like not dropping back in coverage very often. He makes that move to the cheetah position. I wonder how they continue to use a guy like Deshaun McCullough, and I trust Brent Venables and his brain a hell of a lot better than me in terms of you guys. You got guys like Deshaun McCullough, Robert Spears Jennings, Kendall Dobie, all guys that I think can work that cheetah, that nickel position. And I cannot wait to see what Brent Venables decides to do with all that versatility and playmaking at that position.
Yeah, especially when you got guys like, I mean, obviously Deshaun McCullough is probably not going to be your cover guy, but like, you did see him start to fly around a little bit and make plays off the edge and do some of those things. When you can make plays off the edge on running attacks, I think that makes you so much more dangerous. I think it allows you to, you don't need to necessarily play the run like super hard and have a full box if you have athletes. And I think, frankly, all those cheetahs, those nickels, those Dolbies, Spears Jennings, in McCullough, they all kind of did that. They all do a really good job sniffing runs out and coming down and filling it up. But I do think it's kind of interesting. You have 3 guys who I think all do a little bit something different. I think Dolby's probably your best cover guy in that. McCullough's obviously your box guy, and Spears Jennings is probably your best hybrid player. So it'd be interesting to see what they do at that position.
Got a lot of names, and that's such an important position. The longtime listeners are probably so tired of me saying this, but at the end of the day, where college football is going, like, if you're a defense, your goal is to match all the speed that this offense is going to throw at you by also not giving up much against the run. And having guys like Deshaun McCullough, Spears Jennings, Kendall Dobie are all guys that really allow you to do that. Then you look at the boundary. I mean, again, some of those guys could kick out to boundary. Gentry's probably your best guy back there as a boundary cornerback. I would like to see them maybe go more to man coverage with him. And then you bring in a guy like Dejon Malone, who I'm actually a really big fan of. Like, long, physical, boundary cornerback. I think Oklahoma looked at this secondary, said, we got a lot of guys that we could kind of slot in at that nickel cheetah position. We want to get another guy on the boundary that kind of lets us go to work with a guy like Kendall Dobie. And so you look at this secondary as a whole, and I'm thinking it's got a lot of boxes checked with a lot of playmaking versatility. And again, at the end of the day, that's a phenomenal problem for Ben Venables to have, because you got a lot of different playmakers that can do a lot of different things. And I cannot wait to watch the spring game and read the spring notes to kind of see where all these guys are slotting in on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what the young guys work into. Obviously, Makari Vickers started to get some play down the stretch. And again, kind of some guys who you think maybe have that attitude and that mentality that you kind of need to be that man cover guy. And you kind of see those premier corners obviously can do it. And you want to be able to work in zone. I think when you get Gentry Williams, he does a really good job being crafty, being able to get his hands on balls and take it away in those zone schemes. But I think there is, again, what you kind of mentioned, that idea of like you bring in a Dejon Malone to play that boundary corner and really just be able to take guys away a little bit more effectively than it felt like they did last year, especially in those bigger games where you dealt with some of those bigger wideouts like at Oklahoma State or Texas, where, again, it did feel like they didn't necessarily have the horses to always just cover those guys one-on-one if they had to.
Can't wait for year 3, especially bringing in a guy like Zach Alley to kind of run this defense. And I think you're going to see that true Brent Venables defense. You saw, I mean, I remember after the 2022 year, we're like, where was the Brent Venables defense that we all expected? You started to see glimpses of it in 2023. And I think going into 2024, I think you get, and as Michigan fans, we can kind of relate to this, right? We make a change with our defensive scheme. Year one, there are some growing pains. Year two, it gets better. And then year three, won a national championship. And I think Oklahoma fans have a lot to be excited about in terms of getting that year three defense going in 2024. Really excited. We'll continue to talk about this group. A ton of names that we probably left out that are going to be contributors for the Sooners. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys again. We'll continue to cover how this defense is shaking out during spring practice, during the offseason. Appreciate y'all rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.